Hey guys, tonight we tiptoe into the dim ruins of a forgotten monastery, one that clings to the side of a misty hill, like it's still waiting for prayers that stopped centuries ago. The sky is bleeding violet into black, and the air smells like old stone and damp moss. Crows have already stopped calling, and the last bird you heard was, well, you're not sure that was a bird. You step over a threshold worn smooth by centuries of feet, some barefoot, some armored, and a few you really hope were human. You probably won't survive this. Or at least not without waking up once or twice to check if that creaking floorboard was just your radiator. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing who's drifting off with me around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the rotted oak gate, its hinges groaning in complaint, and step onto the cobbled path. The stones are uneven, slick with moss, and colder than they should be, like they've forgotten the sun. The monastery rises ahead in shadowed silence, its towers jagged against the sky, its bones showing through ivy and neglect. You swear the windows are watching you. Technically, you're trespassing. This place was abandoned officially around the 1700s after a series of suspicious fires, dwindling clergy, and rumors that pilgrims were seeing things they really didn't want to see. Unofficially, the place never emptied. Locals still avoid it. They say the bells ring by themselves, and sometimes the candles relight even after a storm. And when the wind's just wrong, chanting. But tonight, you're alone? Probably. The gravel crunches underfoot as you step into the outer courtyard where vegetables once grew in tidy monastic rows. Now, it's wild with tall grasses and moonlit weeds. The air hums not with life, but memory. You pass a toppled sundial. Time means nothing here. Appropriate, really, because you're not entirely sure what century it feels like anymore. Let's set the mood a bit deeper. You duck into the main building through an archway, and the temperature drops. Not just a chill. This is the deep, damp cold of stone that's soaked up centuries of candle smoke, incense breath, and buried secrets. The first room you enter used to be the narthex. That's the bit just inside the entrance where pilgrims could wipe their muddy feet and consider repenting for all the medieval shenanigans they'd gotten up to. Your flashlight flickers. Classic. You're surrounded by crumbling frescoes, faded saints with broken eyes, and halos chipped by time, or something less explainable. There's moss on the floor tiles, and the smell of beeswax from candles that haven't burned in your lifetime. You can still sense where the pews once stood, indentations in the dust. You pass a broken bench, and for just a moment, it looks like someone's sitting there. Nope, just shadows. So, here's your first scientific fact for the night. Sound lingers in stone. Literally. It's called acoustic archaeology. Dense materials like limestone and granite can retain the vibrations of sound waves for surprisingly long durations. You won't hear the chants of 13th century monks echoing around your ears, but the walls might remember them better than we do. Now, a little fringe tidbit to twist things a bit. In the 1970s, a researcher proposed something called the stone tape theory. The idea was that emotional or traumatic events could imprint themselves onto the physical environment like stone recording the past. Not scientific consensus by any means, but spooky. Absolutely. And this monastery, with its endless layers of rituals, regrets, and robed silence, feels like the perfect tape deck. You move deeper, hallways stretch out like ribs, narrow and claustrophobic, with doors that seem to breathe open just after you pass. You find a stairwell spiraling up to the bell tower, but tonight's not the night for climbing. Instead, you follow a side corridor that once led to the cloister. Here, the moonlight sneaks in through the broken arches, tracing long fingers across the flagstones. Suddenly, you catch something with the corner of your eye movement. A soft rustle. Just a bat, you tell yourself. Or a rat in a robe. Either way, you keep walking. It's too late to go back now. And besides, you're just getting to the good stuff. At the heart of the monastery lies the chapel, a place designed for holy echoes and fearful symmetry. The altar is still intact barely. Candles melted into monstrous shapes squat along the edges. The air smells of burnt wax and dried lavender, once used to mask less pleasant odors like unwashed habits and rotting saints. Monks lived by a strict schedule called the Divine Office. 7 times a day they prayed. At night, they woke up to chant matins around 2 a.m., which might explain why so many people hear ghostly singing just before dawn. Scientists still argue whether sleep deprivation, combined with isolation, could cause hallucinations strong enough to simulate a haunting. Add in fasting flagellation and a diet consisting mainly of turnips and barley gruel, and you've got yourself a recipe for divine visions or deep psychosis. You kneel for a moment, not to pray, but to feel. The flagstone is smooth, polished by knees long gone. The air is heavy here, like the room is holding its breath. You hear a cough, but it's not yours, or close by. Don't worry, it's probably residual energy. Probably. To distract yourself, you wander into the side chapel, where a few broken relic cases sit under dusty cloths. This would have held bones teeth, maybe a bit of a saint's scalp. Holy and gruesome all at once. In medieval Europe, relics weren't just spiritual, they were currency. A monastery with good relics attracted pilgrims. Pilgrims brought money. Money built bell towers. And if your relic happened to have a ghost attached, even better for marketing. You can almost picture it. Robed monks giving hushed tours by candlelight, whispering tales of levitating chalices and incorruptible corpses. A bit like this YouTube channel, but with worse hygiene. Outside the window, you hear the wind pick up, except it's not rustling the grass. It's whispering words, old ones, Latin. Or is that just your imagination stretching its legs? The air feels thick again, like you're walking through unseen curtains. You move into the refectory, the dining hall. Long gone are the wooden tables, but the bones of the room remain. You stand at the end where the prior once read aloud during meals so no one would accidentally enjoy their food. The acoustics are strange. You speak a single word hello, and the echo answers with too many syllables. There's a reason monks built this place like a sound trap. Chanting prayer ritual, they needed the architecture to amplify devotion. But maybe it also amplifies other things. Oh, and fun fact, some monasteries had little holes in the wall where food could be passed to anchorites, people who willingly brick themselves into a room for life to be closer to God. So, next time you think your studio apartment is too small, remember those folks? You're getting tired now. Or maybe it's just the monastery pressing on your mind. Still, you follow one last hallway, narrow and crooked, ending in a wooden door half open. Inside, you find a cell, a monk's private chamber. It's barely 6 feet across, with a bed made of stone and a shelf that might have once held a single book or a skull. Maybe both. You sit. The air hums again, but softer now, like a lullaby sung through centuries. There's no electricity here, no cell signal. Just you, the dust, and whatever echoes time left behind. You lie back on the stone slab, staring at the wooden beams above. One of them creaks like it remembers a hanging. Sleep begins to wrap its arms around you, slow and persistent. But before your eyes close, you swear you hear soft steps in the hallway, bare feet on cold stone. They stop outside your door. The handle turns, nope, never mind, just the wind again. Probably. You wake or think you do to the sound of nothing at all. It's that particular brand of silence found only in thick-walled sanctuaries where time pooled like water in a basin. You're still lying on the stone bed in the monk's cell neck at a mildly regrettable angle, limbs half numb. And there's a dry taste in your mouth that tastes suspiciously like 14th century limestone. Everything is darker now. Even the moon has moved on, abandoning you to the ambient glow of whatever faint starlight manages to slip in through the narrow slit of a window. You shift upright, bones popping in a way that suggests monks weren't big on ergonomic furniture. Across the room, the wooden door stands closed. You're pretty sure you left it ajar. This is fine, totally fine. You push it open and step back into the corridor where your footsteps echo in soft repetition, mimicking the rhythm of ancient sandals. You wander toward the cloister, the central square around which monastic life once pulsed like a prayer wheel. Tonight, it's moon-washed and still framed by arched walkways and vines that dangle like forgotten rosaries. You walk slowly, imagining the quiet steps of dozens of monks circling here at dawn, heads bowed, lips moving in silent repetition. The life of a medieval monk was quiet, strict, and let's be honest, absolutely miserable. The whole poverty, chastity, and obedience thing might sound holy, but it translated roughly to starving, lonely, and bossed around. Most monks lived according to the rule of Saint Benedict, a document so detailed it included when to wake, how much wine was too much, it was basically always too much, and how many psalms to chant if someone sneezed too loudly during prayers. Okay, slight exaggeration, but only slight. Still, daily life followed a rigid, unchanging pattern. Wake before dawn, chant, pray, eat gruel, work, pray again, more gruel, copy texts, chant more, sleep in short, cold shifts, rinse, repeat, possibly hallucinate. Fun fact, monks weren't allowed to speak freely. They took vows of silence, though not absolute ones. Think more medieval introverts with a highly limited vocabulary. To communicate during meals or in the cloister, they used a set of approved hand signs. Want salt. Make a gesture. Need the toilet. Oh, there was a sign for that too. Don't worry. So here's your mainstream science fact for this segment. Prolonged silence can affect brain activity in fascinating ways. Studies show that environments without verbal communication can actually increase auditory sensitivity, causing the brain to invent sounds or amplify existing ones. Translation: those monks in silence. They probably did hear things. Faint whispers, ghostly echoes, their own name from the corner of the room, which might explain a lot. You head towards the old dormitory, but pause outside the refectory again. The air seems different now, wetter, heavier, filled with the sort of scent that follows a candle just after it's snuffed out. You remember that this was once the place where dozens of brown-robed figures gathered to eat in silence. They weren't allowed to enjoy their food. That would be sinful. Medieval monks had some bizarre food rules. For example, they were forbidden from eating four-legged animals except on certain feast days. So they got creative. Beavers fish, obviously. They have tails they swim, they must count. The Pope eventually agreed because, frankly, he probably didn't want to argue with monks who were this committed to eating meat on Fridays. Also, eels. So many eels. You think you're joking, but no, eel pie, eel, soup eel jelly. A single monastery might consume thousands of eels in 1 year. Somewhere in heaven, there's an overworked patron saint of eels shaking his head. But here's where the science meets the slightly disturbing archaeological digs in former monastic sites have found massive eel pits, essentially medieval aquaculture farms. Efficient, sustainable, and deeply unsettling when you imagine hundreds of eels slithering in the moonlight while monks chant nearby. Something about it just feels cursed. You lean against the cool stone of a pillar and let your mind drift. Picture it, dawn, breaking over the bell tower, the faint clang of iron against bronze, the slow procession of cowled figures moving through the cloister. Each monk wears the same habit, eats the same food, lives the same day, over and over. Their lives were a prayer, stitched together by silence and repetition. In a strange way, it's hypnotic, calming, until you remember the other half of the story. See, monks weren't all about peace and humility. Some of them were deeply, deeply petty. One famous 12th century account tells of two monks getting into a passive-aggressive feud over bread. One believed the loaves should be square, the other round. It escalated into whispered accusations of heresy and the mysterious disappearance of a baking stone. The case was recorded by a monk scribe who you can tell from the handwriting was so done with everyone. There's even evidence of fistfights, yes, between monks over seating arrangements and who got to light the incense. No one tells you this in the history books, but monasteries were basically holy dormitories filled with very hungry men who weren't allowed to gossip. So, they got creative. Scientists still argue whether the mental toll of cloistered life created a unique psychological state, what we might now call monastic psychosis. Hallucinations, intrusive thoughts, even ghost sightings were often written down as divine visions. But maybe they were just side effects of isolation, poor nutrition, and sleeping in unheated stone cells next to someone who snored like a possessed bear. A chill drifts through the cloister. You wrap your arms around yourself and keep moving. You find a bench, original maybe, or just really good at pretending, and sit down. There's a small fountain in the center of the square. It hasn't bubbled in centuries, but you swear you hear dripping water. You watch the arches. You wait. No movement. Not even wind. And then, a whisper. Just one. Short. Male voice. Latin, maybe. Could have been Miserere, have mercy. You blink. Nothing. You're not sure you heard it. Maybe you wanted to hear it. Or maybe that's the stone tape theory again. Emotions soaking into walls and replaying at the right moment, like your mind leaning against a bruised memory. You stand, walk slowly to the refectory's entrance and look inside. Nothing but shadows and overturned furniture, stained flagstones, and the faintest scent of rosemary. They used to burn it as incense and scatter it across the floor during plague season, like a medieval Febreze. Which reminds you, many monks died here. Not violently, not all at once, but over time, slowly, quietly, in the same robe, on the same stone floor, surrounded by the same unchanging chants. There's something heavy about that. You can feel it. And speaking of silence, remember how monks communicated with hand signals. In some monasteries, they developed entire visual languages, dozens of gestures for things like bread, God, abbot, and even I'm sleepy, which, let's be honest, was probably the most used. Some of these signs were later adopted by local deaf communities. Imagine that an entire monastery's coping mechanism for enforced silence eventually helping to shape a new language. History is weirdly poetic that way. Suddenly, a distant bell chimes once. Not loud, not urgent, just enough to cut through the air like a thread being pulled. You look up at the bell tower, but no one's there. At least no one you can see. Maybe it's just wind on metal, or the ghost of an overly punctual timekeeper. Either way, you take that as your cue to retreat. The dormitory lies ahead, tucked behind a crumbling corridor, lined with statues that have all had their noses broken off. Probably not a ghost thing, just teenagers with rocks and bad manners. You reach the threshold, pause, and glance back once more. The cloister, still bathed in moonlight, seems calmer now, less oppressive, like it's accepted your presence. You duck inside. The dormitory smells of dust, ancient straw, and something vaguely medicinal, like dried herbs ground into the very floor. Rows of stone slabs line the room barely long enough for the average modern human. These monks must have slept like pickles in a jar, wrapped in wool, dreaming of nothingness. You pick one near the back, next to a broken window, where ivy has crept in like a curious green ghost. You sit down, exhale, and let your shoulders drop. Through the window, you hear the rustle of leaves. Or robes. Let's say leaves. Tonight, you're a monk, a wandering guest, a silent intruder. You've walked the cloisters, felt the echo of rituals long extinguished, and now you rest beneath beams older than your bloodline. Sleep pulls at you again, soft and persistent. You lie back, arms crossed over your chest, like the effigies carved into cathedral tombs. Outside, the bell chimes once more. You don't remember falling asleep, but you remember waking. This time, it's not to silence, it's to a faint tap, 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 as if a long fingernail is lightly knocking against stone. You lie still, eyes half open, the cold seeping into your spine through the ancient slab. You tell yourself it's probably a tree branch scratching against the wall, or a squirrel, a nocturnal monk squirrel, perfectly normal. The dormitory is darker now. Your eyes take longer to adjust, and when they do, you see that the mist has crept in through the open window. It drifts along the floor like it's trying not to wake anyone. You sit up slowly, your joints reminding you that the 13th century wasn't built for modern lumbar health. You wander toward the doorway again. You know you're not done here, not yet. You haven't seen it all, haven't heard it all. And you've definitely not had enough eerie monastic flashbacks to tide you over until dawn. So you head left toward the transept, where the old stained glass windows once turned morning light into technicolor theology. These days, most of the glass is gone. What's left are jagged shards like broken teeth framing the world outside in crooked holy silhouettes. But centuries ago, these windows were the status symbols of the religious elite. And this is where the most boring and most ridiculous monastic feud of the 1400s took place. Not over relics. Not over scriptural interpretation. No. Over the color blue. Monasteries often competed over who had the richest, most heavenly windows. But creating ultramarine, the deep velvety blue, extracted from lapis lazuli, was expensive. So expensive that it sometimes cost more per ounce than gold. Naturally, some monasteries went all in. Others faked it. Here's your science fact. That deep blue pigment was made from lapis mined in Afghanistan, then painstakingly ground into powder and purified. The process took weeks. What you ended up with was ultramarine, a pigment so prized that painters had to be given special permission to use it. That's why the Virgin Mary always got the best blue in medieval art. Blue was for royalty, purity, and public relations. So when one monastery spent a lot of money importing ultramarine for their windows, their rivals were, let's say, visibly salty. And thus began the Great Glass Dispute of 1472. Accusations flew. Windows were mysteriously shattered. At least one novice monk was caught smuggling cheaper, green-tinted panes under his robes. One abbot even wrote a formal complaint titled De Coloribus Indignus, or Concerning Unworthy Colors. Imagine being so mad about someone else's stained glass that you pen an actual theological takedown over it. That's medieval pettiness at its choir-robed finest. You walk beneath the skeletal remains of those very windows now. The moonlight cuts through the holes in a jigsaw of pale angles. You pause and look up. One fragment still glows faintly, a sliver of ultramarine catching starlight in a way that seems almost deliberate. But here's a curious tidbit. Some historians believe that certain windows were designed to create optical illusions at specific times of year. When the sun hit just right, halos would glow, eyes would sparkle, and saints would shimmer to life. A very holy special effects budget. Scientists still argue whether these effects were intentional or just happy accidents. The builders certainly weren't writing PhD theses on optical light scatter, but they knew their way around symbolism and how to wow a pilgrim. You're distracted from the window by a creak behind you. You turn, expecting to see. Well, you're not sure what you expect. A stray animal. Another tourist. A monk made entirely of mist and grudges, but there's nothing there. Only the wind curling through the broken glass. You press forward into what remains of the chapter house, the place where monks held daily meetings to read a chapter of their rule book. They sat in silence, nodded solemnly, and pretended not to fall asleep. But the debates that did break out here, oh, they were fire. One long-forgotten manuscript recounts a vote on whether it was sinful to trim nose hair on fast days. Another serious disagreement involved whether the abbey's cat should be fed twice a day or once, given that it had grown too fat for godly dignity. You can almost hear the indignation in the dusty Latin footnotes. And look, there's the stone bench where the abbot sat, arms folded, trying not to roll his eyes while Brother Anselm complained again about someone using his stylus without permission. Sometimes you can feel it, that subtle psychic residue of irritation, boredom, and sanctified rage. Like 1,000 arguments are still humming softly in the stones. It's not all ridiculous, of course. Some discussions were heavy sins, confessed monks, reprimanded lives, redirected. There's gravity here, responsibility, and maybe a ghost or two that never moved on because they had more to say. You exit the chapter house and slip into the cloister's southern wing where the light is dimmer and the air carries a faint tang of iron. You come across a statue, just a pedestal. How now, really? But the inscription is legible. It's Latin for, "Blessed are the silent, they shall hear the truth." You pause. There's a whisper in the wind again, almost like words straining through wet cloth. Your skin prickles. You blink, and for a split second you swear you see a shape moving beneath one of the arches. A cowled figure, bent, hood up, gone. Was that memory imagination, a replay, or just the shadows playing tricks on your sleep-deprived brain? Here's the fringe theory of the section. Some researchers have speculated that hauntings in monasteries are more common not because of death counts, but because of ritual repetition. The idea is that daily practices, especially highly emotional or spiritual ones, leave behind energetic imprints. Places where the same act is performed over and over, kneeling, chanting, weeping, may create loops. Little existential echoes that never quite stop. Whether you believe in it or not, there's something about the way this place feels, as if every breath you take overlaps with someone else's from centuries ago. You move down a hallway, barely wide enough for your shoulders. This was a processional path, once lined with torches and holy men in synchronized steps. Their shoes would have been simple leather, hand-stitched, and far less waterproof than necessary. The floor beneath you is worn into a curve. That's how often they walked it. Hundreds of thousands of feet. One path, one purpose, but not always pious. There's graffiti here, scratched into the plaster by some long-dead mischief maker. It's crude. A doodle of what might be a chicken wearing a mitre. You snort. Even monks needed to blow off steam. You follow the hallway to a small oratory, an intimate space for private prayer. There's a small basin in the corner, dry and cracked, where holy water used to shimmer under candlelight. You dip your fingers into nothing. Old habits, maybe. It's here in this quiet that you remember something strange. Back near the stained glass, you saw an inscription on the sill, one that said, "Vigilate semper," always watchful. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't recorded in any monk's writing. And it's not there now when you picture it again in your mind. So, who wrote it? You leave the oratory a little faster than before, retracing your steps toward the cloister. Your mind's caught in that strange liminal space, half dream, half memory. You're not sure what time it is. Midnight, 2. It doesn't matter. Time here follows a different rule book. You step into the moonlight. Again, the cloister square laid out like a board game you don't know the rules to. Mist coils along the arches. A statue of an angel has one wing cracked, the other held out in silent greeting or warning. You turn back toward the dormitory, ready to return to your slab of stone, your medieval Airbnb. But something catches your eye high up in the window of the bell tower. A flicker. A shape. Watching. Gone. You pause, heart slow but steady. You've been respectful. Quiet. Just a guest. Still, you whisper aloud just in case. Good night. The wind doesn't answer. But the bell chimes again once. You wake again, this time to a strange feeling, not quite fear, but not comfort either. Something in between. Like you're being watched by someone who doesn't hate you, but also wouldn't mind if you left. You sit up on the stone slab and rub your neck. At this point, you're about one dream away from total medieval immersion. Your skin's cold. Your hands smell faintly of old wax and damp linen. The mist has crept in again. It's clingier this time, curling around your legs like a cat that's trying to tell you something but doesn't speak English. You stand and stretch, and your knees audibly disapprove. Back through the dormitory, you pass those empty sleeping spaces, those relics of lives built around obedience, repetition, and as you're about to find out punishment, you head toward a door you haven't opened yet. Heavy, iron hinges. The wood's warped, swollen with age and secrets. You give it a push, and it creaks open to reveal a steep staircase spiraling downward. Ah, the punishment cells. Monks weren't just devoted, they were also deeply into discipline. As in, eat bread and water alone in a dark cell for 3 weeks because you overslept Matins levels of discipline. These were the places monks sent each other when someone got too mouthy, too greedy, or God forbid, laughed out loud. As you descend, your footsteps echo like hesitant drum beats. The air thickens. It smells like iron and mildew. The torch brackets are empty but blackened. You run your hand along the wall, and your fingers come away smudged with soot. You wonder how many monks stumbled down this same staircase, whispering prayers and regrets with every step. At the bottom is a row of cells, low ceilings, no windows. Each one just large enough for a man to sit cross-legged, reflect on his sins, and try not to lose his mind. Let's talk about the science of sensory deprivation for a second. Studies show that spending prolonged time in total silence and darkness can drastically alter brain chemistry. Visual hallucinations, time distortion, emotional detachment, it's all part of the deal. A monk in isolation could go in with guilt and come out with divine revelations, or full-blown psychosis. Flip a coin. Some of the monks documented visions after their stints, hear angels, devils, flashes of light. One claimed the walls whispered the psalms to him. Another described being lifted from the ground and spoken to by a saint with the voice of his dead brother. Scholars debate whether these were genuine religious experiences or just the neurological effects of hunger, cold, and fear. You crouch and peer into one of the cells. The floor is uneven, the ceiling close enough to brush your head. Scratches mark the wall. Tiny etchings that look like tally marks, a calendar of repentance, or days waited, or days forgotten. And here's your weird historical tidbit. In some orders, monks were forbidden from speaking even during their punishments. Imagine that, locked in a freezing stone box, cut off from everyone, and still not allowed to scream. Silence wasn't just sacred, it was enforced, rigorously, sometimes violently. Monks also had a kind of internal justice system, with recorded infractions ranging from left the abbey without permission to sang off key during lauds. Depending on the order, punishments could include extra fasting, sleep deprivation, public confession, or physical penance like self-flagellation. You step inside one of the cells and sit, just to feel it. The chill is instant. The darkness wraps around you velvety and thick. You close your eyes and breathe in. It smells like wet wool dust and the ghost of prayers that ended in silence. You open your eyes and nope. That shadow in the corner is just your own. Probably. Still, you back out because you've had just about enough authentic medieval trauma for one night. Back upstairs, the air is better, less dense. You follow a hallway deeper into the east wing, toward an area known in the monastery's original layout as the disciplinarium. Basically, the HR department, but with more whips. This was where monks confessed their failures and received correction. It wasn't all dungeons and doom. Sometimes it was just stern lectures. But when a monk went really off script, stealing violence scandal punishments became creative. One record tells of a monk who was made to crawl the cloister on his knees every night for 40 days while chanting Psalm 51. Another was ordered to wear a robe covered in bells so everyone would hear him coming. Sort of like a medieval dunce cap. Or a very sad cat. In extreme cases, monks could be excommunicated from the community. Not kicked out, but cut off. Left to live on the edge of the abbey, alone in silence. No shared meals. No prayers together. Just the wind and the cold, and whatever voices the walls offered instead. You reach a chamber that looks like a blend between a chapel and an interrogation room. A single chair sits in the center, facing a blank wall. You sit. It feels wrong. Not dangerous, just deeply, viscerally wrong. As if the stone under your feet disapproves of your presence. As if someone sat in this chair centuries ago and left part of themselves behind. Maybe the part that snapped after 10 days without sleep or bread. You speak out loud, just a word. Peace. It echoes too loudly. Bounces back with a delay that sounds like mockery. You stand quickly and leave heart beating just a touch too fast. Here's a fun psychological fact. Places associated with punishment tend to trigger higher cortisol levels in visitors, even without any visible stimuli. Basically, your body reacts to invisible tension, and yours is doing great right now, totally not anxious at all. You're definitely not looking over your shoulder every few steps. As you re-enter the main corridor, you notice a door you didn't see before. That happens a lot here. Rooms shift. Or maybe your eyes just catch up slowly. The door opens into what looks like a tiny courtroom. Benches a lectern, and on the wall, a carved inscription. In silence, truth is heard. Another reminder that monks didn't just fear sin, they feared being out of sync. And scientists still argue whether the extreme regimentation of monastic life fostered genuine peace or simply suppressed natural human behavior until it exploded elsewhere, like in dreams, or whispers, or sudden bursts of laughter during matins that earned you a one-way trip to the disciplinarium. You walk back through the corridor and glance at a niche in the wall. A shallow recess, empty now, but once used to hold instruments of penance belts, whips, chains. Not for violence, but for spiritual discipline. Self-inflicted pain to purify the soul, or at least to keep the body too tired to misbehave. Some monasteries kept discipline logs, where each brother's infractions and penances were listed in painful detail. There are entries like, Brother Petrus spoke during silent hour, 5 lashes and no wine, and Brother Joachim caught sleeping during vigils. 1 week of floor sleeping. No cheese, no cheese. A brutal fate. You reach the cloister again, grateful for the open air, even if it's filled with mist and maybe regrets. The sky's lighter now, barely, a sickly gray that hints at morning or some illusion of it. You sit on the edge of the old fountain and exhale. You've walked the path of silence, witnessed the echo of penance, and survived the judgment of walls older than most countries. And somewhere deep in the stone, you hear it again. That soft tap, tap, tap. But this time, it's not a warning. It's a rhythm, like someone walking, bare feet on cold stone, coming closer. You don't move right away. That tap, 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 the soft rhythm echoing up from the lower quarters, has a measured certainty to it. Not frantic, not stumbling, just calm, deliberate footsteps on ancient flagstone. You listen. 1 beat, pause, another beat. Whoever or whatever is walking knows exactly where it's going. You ease up from the fountain's edge and move slowly, quietly, keeping to the wall like the world's sleepiest ninja. The mist clings to your ankles as if it's trying to hold you back. You glance once toward the bell tower, still shrouded in shadows, then slip through a narrow archway off the cloister that leads to one of the oldest wings of the monastery. This is where they kept the library, the scriptorium, the sanctuary of monks who never spoke, but spent their lives hunched over parchment quills, scratching furiously, copying Bibles, translating Greek treatises, and occasionally doodling weirdly muscular rabbits in the margins. You step inside, and it's like crossing into another world. The air is dense with dust and time. The temperature drops 5 degrees. You can practically taste the parchment. A few shelves remain upright skeletal frames lined with splinters where knowledge once stood. Others have collapsed, leaving piles of ancient timber and rotted paper like a library post-apocalypse. There's a desk under the window half buried in debris, and a stool that looks one sigh away from disintegration. This room once held hundreds of books, handmade, painstakingly copied, illuminated with gold leaf and crushed beetle shells. In an age when most people couldn't read their own name, this place was a vault of power, a place where words lived longer than bodies. Here's your mainstream scientific fact. The average monk could take up to a year to produce a single book. 1 book. And that's not counting illumination binding or repairs after some clumsy novice dropped his inkpot again. Manuscripts weren't just records. They were living prayers. And they were precious. So precious that some books were chained to the shelves. Literally. Imagine being that concerned someone might walk off with your 12-pound hand-copied Latin herbal that you bolted it to the furniture. You walk between two remaining stacks. It's quiet, eerily so. No birds outside, no wind, just the faint scent of mold and ink. Then you hear it. Scratch. Not loud, just a soft dragging noise. You freeze. It stops. You wait. Nothing. You continue on and find the desk by the window. It's still intact if crooked. On its surface lies a piece of parchment mottled half-rotted, but there's writing. Faded black ink. Tight crabbed Latin letters. A passage from a psalm possibly, or a warning. It's hard to tell in the moonlight. You look closer. There's something written in a different hand at the bottom. Manus scripta, oculus vigilate. The hand writes, the eye watches. Cool, totally not creepy. Let's take a detour into fringe territory, shall we? Some medieval monks believed that the very act of writing invited divine or demonic attention. There are letters and marginalia warning copyists not to drift too far into certain passages lest they invite the gaze. And yes, there's one 13th century account of a monk who claimed his own manuscript began speaking to him during vigils. He was found days later, completely bald and muttering about the words being inside. Of course, modern scholars suggest he probably suffered from ergot poisoning, thanks to moldy rye bread turning his brain into a medieval LSD trip. Still, the story stuck. Scientists still argue whether such hallucinations were interpreted as divine contact or caused by the very isolation of monastic work. One thing's clear: the scriptorium wasn't just a study hall. It was a pressure cooker of silence, intensity, and metaphysical suspicion. You hear another sound this time, a soft whisper. One word. You don't recognize the language. Maybe Latin. Maybe older. Maybe not language at all. You spin slowly, but nothing's there. Just empty desks, cracked shelves, and that same oppressive stillness. You step toward the far corner of the room, where the floor has partially collapsed. Beyond the broken edge is a staircase leading down. You shine your light and see a space beneath the scriptorium, not listed on any known map of the monastery. You descend cautiously. The room below is small and circular, with walls covered in crude writing. Not illuminated scripture, but charcoal scrawls, symbols, names, lines scratched deep into the plaster. Some are crossed out. Others are repeated dozens of times. One phrase stands out: silens non est vacuum. Silence is not emptiness. This is probably where the monks went when the script in their heads started to bleed into the real world. A containment chamber, or a confession room, or maybe just a place where someone tried to outwrite the voices. You run your fingers along the wall. One of the carvings feels newer, less worn, almost fresh. That's fine. Everything's fine. You back away, return up the stairs, and step once more into the scriptorium. Your heart's beating a little faster now, and you're starting to understand why libraries still feel sacred. It's not just about knowledge. It's about how fragile a mind can become when it's stuffed too full of secrets and asked to copy them forever in silence. Outside, the cloister feels almost warm by comparison. You take a deep breath and move across toward the old reliquary, a chamber once filled with bones, bloodwood from the true cross allegedly, and maybe half a dozen mismatched finger bones, all labeled St. John. The reliquary door is half-hinged, sagging. You nudge it open with a creak that echoes like a scream in reverse. Inside, the air is stale, but strangely sweet. Dried lavender, frankincense, clove. Dust motes float like tiny ghosts. And on the shelves, empty glass cases. Pedestals with velvet-lined cradles now filled only with shadows. Once this room would have been the heart of the monastery's faith. Pilgrims came from far and wide to kneel here weeping and hopeful, offering coins in exchange for a glimpse of a saint's knuckle. And maybe that worked. Maybe miracles did happen here. Here's your quirky tidbit. Many medieval relics were, let's say, imaginatively sourced. Some were actual holy remains. Others were animal bones, random teeth, or parts of unclaimed bodies dressed up with backstories and ornate Latin labels. The competition between monasteries to acquire the best relics led to black markets. Yes, actual relic heists. One story tells of a monk who snuck into a rival abbey and stole their prized reliquary by disguising himself as a very old, very devout pilgrim with extremely large pockets. But relics weren't just spiritual bling. They were believed to do things, heal the sick, ward off storms, even speak. Some monks claimed the bones would rattle when danger was near. Others said the room would fill with warmth when prayers were answered. You stand still, waiting for either warmth or rattling. All you get is a gust of wind that makes the velvet ripple like breath. Scientists still argue whether belief in relics produced genuine placebo effects or whether the ritual surrounding them activated deeper parts of the brain. Either way, people swore by them, and some people still do. You kneel briefly, just to feel what the stone felt like. What desperation might have soaked into this place. The floor is grooved with knee marks, hundreds, maybe thousands, as if belief could wear a hole in time. As you stand, you hear it again. That soft whisper, closer this time. Just a syllable, low, breathless. You back away slowly and exit the reliquary. Once outside, you pause under an archway. The stars are fading. The sky is smudging into the first hints of dawn. But that doesn't mean the monastery is quieting down. You hear steps again. Behind you, just around the corner, you turn. No one. But something's changing. The bells chime once, then twice, then again. 3 times in total. No wind, no ropes pulled, just sound. Perfect, hollow, and wrong. You walk faster now, not running, not yet. You pass the cloister, the fountain, the broken sundial. You round the corridor and re-enter the dormitory, but the air feels different, electric. You lie down again on the stone slab. You close your eyes. The whisper comes one last time, soft, just above your ear. Scribe. Then nothing. Just the distant sound of a quill scratching across parchment in a room where no one has written in centuries. You lie still for a long time, eyes closed, listening. But the scratching sound doesn't return. Neither does the whisper. It's as though the monastery has for now decided to let you be. You exhale long and slow and let the chill soak through your bones. Somehow the cold is less hostile now, more like a blanket, heavy, comforting in the strangest way. But something tugs at you, a lingering question, a silent curiosity that stirs you from your stone slab just as dawn creeps through the cracked window. You stretch stiff from a night of ghost watching and involuntary historical role play and head back out into the courtyard. The light is weak and gray, just enough to reveal the crooked shadows cast by the cloister columns. It's quiet, not peaceful exactly, but less tense. Like the monastery is holding its breath rather than glaring at you. You find yourself drawn toward the bell tower now. You've avoided it long enough. 3 unprompted chimes in the middle of the night tend to earn a visit. The door is slightly ajar. Of course it is, and the hinges sigh as you open it. Inside, it smells of rusted metal, pigeon feathers, and centuries of strained purpose. The stairs are stone and spiral up with an alarming tightness clearly not designed for people with vertigo claustrophobia or strong survival instincts. You grip the railing worn smooth by thousands of monkish hands and begin the climb. Each step creaks under your weight, though logically stone shouldn't creak. But then again, logic stopped sending postcards about 5 hours ago. You pass narrow slits of windows, little more than arrow-shaped gaps that let in pale shafts of morning light. As you ascend, the air gets thinner, dustier, as if you're moving not just upward, but backward in time. Halfway up, you find a small landing, an alcove with a wooden bench probably once used for rest or contemplation. Or maybe for the monk in charge of the bells to nap between tolls. On the wall beside it, a carving, a small relief of a bell with a face. You blink. No, not a face on the bell, a face inside it. The expression is strange mouth-open eyes blank, like it's caught mid-scream. You stare too long and decide not to think about it. You keep climbing. Near the top, your breath quickens. Not from effort, but from atmosphere. The space tightens. The light dims. And finally, you reach the belfry. It's not what you expect. The room is circular, open to the sky on 3 sides through massive arches. The cold wind slices in. Pigeons flap angrily from the rafters, unsettled by your presence. The bell hangs in the center, huge, cracked, but still upright. The rope is long gone. Nothing should be able to ring it. You step closer. Here's your science fact for the night or morning, depending on how awake you feel. Bells were not just tools for marking time. In medieval belief, they had spiritual weight. Their vibrations were thought to drive away demons, cleanse sin from the air, and announce the presence of holiness. That's why bells were baptized with holy water oils and prayers. They were seen as living entities, sacred instruments. And this one, it hums softly. Just enough to tickle the soles of your feet if you stand still long enough. You reach out and touch it. The metal is icy smooth and vibrates faintly under your fingers. It shouldn't. There's no wind strong enough, no mechanical movement. And yet, you glance up. Inside the bell, something glimmers. A small square of parchment, folded, stuffed in the hollow. You reach in because, of course you do, and gently extract it. The paper is stiff, water-damaged, but the ink is legible. It reads, "In hora mortis pulsabit iterum." At the hour of death, it shall ring again. You swallow. Cool. No big deal. Just an ancient cursed bell with its own business hours. But here's a delightful fringe theory for you. There's a belief in some corners of Europe that certain bells develop a memory, not metaphorically literally, that once they ring for death, they remember it. That if rung again at the wrong time, they can call the dead back, not as spirits, but as unfinished echoes, confused and wandering. It's not accepted science, of course. Scientists still argue whether such folklore arose from collective trauma, war, plague, famine that left communities haunted by their own memories. But in places like this, where time doesn't flow normally and the stones seem to listen, the theories don't sound quite so absurd. You refold the paper and tuck it into your pocket, just empty. You leave the bell behind and descend again faster this time, not running, but aware of every squeak, every flutter, every echo that seems to follow you. Back in the cloister, the day has properly begun. Birds chirp cautiously. The mist thins. And for the first time, you feel almost welcome. You decide to explore the monks' workspaces, the places where they labored with their hands, not just their minds. Monasteries weren't just centers of prayer. They were engines of production. You wander into what remains of the workshop. The carpentry area is mostly collapsed, but remnants remain: wooden pegs, a cracked plane, the fossilized handle of a hammer. A shelf has survived the years, still holding a few rusted nails and a pair of scissors that definitely look too clean. Here's your unexpected fact. Many monasteries were technological innovators. The monks developed sophisticated water systems, built early clocks, and pioneered tools for agriculture. This monastery in particular once boasted a working water-powered grist mill, a big deal in the 13th century. They even had a basic heating system in the infirmary. That's right, heated rooms in the Middle Ages, which is almost as miraculous as the relics. You walk through the stone arch into the garden, or what's left of it. The herb beds are wild now, overrun with nettles and thistles, but you can still pick out lavender, rosemary, and sage. Once this garden fed the monks' bodies and minds. They believed in the medicinal power of plants, and their infirmary, the monastic doctor, was often one of the most educated men in the region. He also had access to everything: poppies, mandrake, henbane, sleep aids, painkillers, hallucinogens. So when a monk said he saw angels while being treated for a fever, well, take that with a handful of dried belladonna. You kneel to brush your fingers across the rosemary. It smells clean, sharp, grounding. The kind of scent that makes you feel like you're still part of the living. And just beside it, barely visible beneath the overgrowth, is a stone plaque. You clear the weeds. It reads, "Quies in sonitu." Rest in the sound. Another riddle. Another whisper from the past. You stand and look toward the chapel. You haven't been back there since the first night. The stained saints and cracked altar still wait. But this time, you notice something different. In the shadow of the transept high on the wall is a smaller bell. Not the grand dramatic one from the tower, but a sanctus bell. Smaller, meant for signaling specific parts of the Mass. Its rope dangles loosely. You walk over. Gently, with 2 fingers, you pull. Ding! A soft, clear note echoes through the entire cloister. Pure, hollow, unsettlingly beautiful. And then from somewhere in the hallway behind you, footsteps, quick, light, bare. You turn. Nothing. But the bell chimes again. Ding! You don't touch it. You don't need to. It rings a third time. Then silence. The monastery, it seems, is awake again. You step back from the little Sanctus bell, your fingers still tingling from the brief touch. It sways slightly, as if disturbed by more than just your gentle tug, like someone else unseen had followed suit a second later. But no one's there. Of course not. You tell yourself it was nothing. A breeze. A trick of tension in the rope. But your legs are already carrying you away, faster than you mean to move. Back into the open air of the cloister where the sky at least doesn't lie. You slow your pace. Breathe. And then you remember the room you haven't explored yet, the apothecary and alchemy quarters. You saw the door last night near the garden, half covered by ivy and marked with a nearly invisible etching. A chalice, a flame, and a star. Typical cryptic monk stuff. You head there now, rounding the stone path, feet brushing over dew-slicked grass and past silent overgrown herbs. The apothecary wing is small and sunken, its ceiling low and built into the side of a hill to stay cool. You push open the warped door, and the smell hits you immediately. Dust, yes, but underneath that, faint traces of mint vinegar and something oddly metallic. Not quite blood, not quite rust, maybe time. The light inside is soft, filtered through yellowed panes that were once vibrant stained glass. A few dusty bottles line the far shelf. One's labeled Syrupus Hyssopy syrup of hyssop, used for coughs. Another simply says Aqua Vitae. That's medieval code for extremely strong booze. You pass the workbench and run your fingers across the stone. It's pocked and stained from centuries of crushing, boiling, distilling. Mortar and pestle rest nearby, still as if waiting for hands long gone. Here's your science fact. Alchemy may have been pre-scientific, but it wasn't all snake oil and nonsense. Many alchemists made real progress in chemistry, metallurgy, and medicine, monks included. Their quest for transmutation and the philosopher's stone led them to early discoveries in evaporation, distillation, and fermentation. And some of those potions, they worked, at least a little. You crouch by a cabinet half hidden behind the bench. The door creaks open to reveal shelves filled with tiny drawers, each labeled in curling Latin nux vomica strychnine, belladonna, deadly nightshade, calyx viva quicklime. You're now officially inside what was probably the most dangerous room in the monastery. And not just chemically. You pull open a drawer at random. Inside is a fragment of parchment, stained and curled. You unfold it carefully. There's a drawing, a circle, within which a triangle holds an eye. Classic mysticism. Below it a note. He who transforms the body awakens the unseen. Cool, normal, not ominous at all. You place it back exactly as you found it, slowly. This is where the lines blurred for monks, religion and science, faith and alchemy, healing and experimentation. Some were content to make salves for rashes and poultices for broken bones. Others wanted more. Fringe, belief time. A few monastic orders were suspected of experimenting with life extension, spiritually justified as wanting more years to serve God. There are stories, unconfirmed of course, about tinctures made from relic dust and bat's blood taken at midnight under specific moon phases. Scientists still argue whether these rumors were propaganda from rival abbeys or exaggerated reports of otherwise standard herbalism. But enough charred recipe books and banned ingredient lists have been found in monastic ruins to keep the theories alive. So you move deeper into the chamber and find a spiral staircase leading down a cellar probably, or something they didn't want people finding too easily. Your feet echo as you descend. The air changes again, damp, metallic. You reach a small stone chamber with shelves along the walls, glass vials, copper tools, a crucible blackened from fire. One corner has a round table with star-shaped etchings burned into the surface. But the centerpiece is the book. It lies open on a stand in the center of the room, dustless. Pages yellowed, but intact. You approach slowly. The ink is faded but readable. Not Latin this time. Some parts are Greek, others unidentifiable symbols that look like someone crossed chemistry notes with a bad dream. The page is titled Transmutatio Animae, Transmutation of the Soul. Lovely. You skim the text. It speaks of distilling spirit from matter, of hearing voices in silence, of drinking deeply from something called the inner well. You step back, and that's when you see the second staircase. It leads even deeper. You hesitate. You absolutely know better. Every horror film you've ever seen is begging you to turn around, but you're not going to sleep if you don't look. So down you go. This room is colder still. Stone walls, no shelves. Just a single slab in the center and a basin carved into the floor stained dark. This was no laboratory. This was ritual. The carvings on the wall are faint, worn smooth by time and possibly hands. One looks like a serpent eating its own tail. Another, a star surrounded by flames. And on the far wall, barely visible, a single phrase, et nunc vigilat. And now it watches. You step backward without realizing it. Something moves. Just a flicker in the dark near the basin. A suggestion of a figure, cowled, motionless. You blink, and it's gone. You're officially done with basements. Back up the stairs through the lab, out the apothecary wing. You gulp down fresh air like it's water after a bad dream. The sun's up now, low in the sky, but trying its best. And for a moment, the monastery feels less haunted and more patient. You remember one more place, the kitchen. It's the most human room in any monastery, the place of bread and soup and everyday smells. You head that way, now your steps slower, not from fear, but from something else. Reverence. The kitchen is intact, surprisingly. The hearth is long cold, but the soot still lines the stones. Wooden utensils are scattered on a table, warped but recognizable. You see hooks where herbs were once hung to dry, and a cauldron rusted in place on the floor. You open a cabinet and find a small ceramic bowl filled with shriveled something. Mushrooms, roots hard to tell. You close it gently. Here's your scientific moment. The monastic diet was deeply tied to the seasons. Most monks were vegetarian, not necessarily by faith, but by practicality. Meals were simple soups, beans, black bread, the occasional fish, and sometimes mysterious stews with ingredients that didn't make the weekly menu. A 14th century record from a nearby abbey documents a strange illness that afflicted a group of monks after a spring feast. Symptoms included seeing lights in the walls and speaking in tongues. Likely culprit ergot again, that cursed mold. But some believed the kitchen herbs had been tainted by a rival order, because even monks had beef. Scientists still argue whether kitchen-based poisonings were real or just convenient explanations for collective delusions. But more than one abbey was abandoned after bad soup. You wander the room, picturing the men who once stood here, laughing quietly over broth, sneaking in scraps from the garden, exchanging glances that broke vows of silence. In here, they were people. Tired, hungry, overworked, and human. And then you hear it. A soft clang from the cauldron. You turn. It's still. But you walk over and peer in. Inside, at the very bottom, is a spoon, carved with a tiny star on the handle. You fish it out. And then, footsteps. Behind you. Quick. You spin. Nothing. Just the door swinging slightly on its own. You step outside and let the sun warm your face. Something in the monastery has shifted. Less oppressive. Less hostile. Maybe amused even. Like it's enjoyed the company. You clutch the spoon still cold in your hand, and somewhere behind the walls, someone chuckles. Softly. You're standing in the sun now. Real sunlight, not moonlight playing tricks on your retinas. It feels warmer than you remembered. It could feel like the sky is rewarding you for making it through the long, haunted night without losing your mind or joining the cloistered undead. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with the scent of old moss rosemary and that curious trace of incense that never seems to go away. Somewhere in the monastery a bird calls. Another answers. It's the most normal sound you've heard in hours. And it's about to get worse. Because now you're heading toward the infirmary. You pass back through the cloister where the morning light filters through broken arches, giving the courtyard a strangely golden glow. A peaceful graveyard almost. But don't let it fool you. Peace has a habit of breaking early around here. The infirmary is built along the northern wall of the complex, long and narrow, with small windows placed high to let in light, but keep out distractions. You walk through the crooked doorway into a room that smells like dried herbs rust and the sharp ghost of vinegar. Stone beds line the walls, low platforms, once topped with straw mattresses. You pause at the nearest one. The straw's long gone, but there's still a faint dip in the stone where bodies lay, day after day, praying for sleep, for healing, for anything but the coughing from the bed next to them. This wasn't just where monks came to heal minor cuts or sprained ankles from slipping on wet cloister tiles. It was where they came to die, and to die a lot, especially during the worst of the plague years. Here's your mainstream science fact when the Black Death hit Europe. In the mid-14th century, it swept through monasteries with particular cruelty. Monks ever, the caregivers tended to the sick without protective gear because, hazmat suits weren't exactly trending in 1348, and so they caught it in droves. Some monasteries lost over 70% of their residents in a single year. Imagine walking into morning prayer and seeing only a handful of your brothers left. Imagine silence where chant used to be. Imagine trying to keep faith when the angel of death has a room key. You run your fingers along the edge of a bed and your skin tingles. Just the cold, you tell yourself. Definitely not ghost fever. Next to each bed is a small niche. In the wall, once used for bowls of broth, damp cloths, or a crucifix, one still holds a cup, chipped and cloudy. You pick it up, half expecting it to hum or burst into flames, or start whispering secrets. It doesn't, but the air gets heavier around you. You keep moving. At the far end of the room is a fireplace, long dead, and beside it, a wooden cabinet. The door hangs open, revealing small drawers labeled in Latin. One says pulvis carbonus charcoal powder, used to treat digestive issues. Another reads aqua argentum silver water, once believed to ward off infection. Let's take a detour into weird. One 15th century monk, Brother Theophilus, recorded a series of dreams he experienced while sick with fever. In them, angels sang in reverse. Saints wept blood. And one possibly prophetic vision described a future where people walked with glass tablets and spoke to others trapped inside. So either he was a time traveler, or the infirmary was handing out some very questionable tea. Fringe belief alert. There's a persistent rumor in some rural parts of Europe that monastery infirmaries could become thin places, spiritual weak spots between life and death, where the veil between worlds wore paper thin. Some believed the souls of the not quite dead hovered reluctant to leave. Others claimed the prayers of the monks created an energetic echo, like a divine tape loop. Scientists still argue whether the eerie energy in these spaces is caused by architectural acoustics, or simply the mind reacting to a known place of suffering. But as you stand in the middle of this infirmary, you'd bet it's both. The echo here isn't just sound, it's emotional. Weighted. You move toward the back wall, where two small rooms flank the corridor. Isolation chambers. These were where the sickest monks were placed, those with symptoms too terrifying to risk among the others. You step inside one. It's barely large enough to lie down in. The air is colder, unmoving. There are scratch marks on the stone near the floor, tiny ones like someone dragged their fingernails across the stone during a fevered night. A bowl rests in the corner, long dry but still marked with the residue of something dark. You turn and step out quickly. The room across the corridor is different, larger, brighter. This was the last stop, the death chamber. A small altar stands against the far wall, just large enough for a crucifix, a candle, and a copy of the Psalter. Monks, who were too far gone, were brought here to die in the presence of prayer. You stand still. A draft moves through the room, even though the windows are sealed. You feel it brush your cheek. Not a gust, not even air. Breath. And then the whisper returns. This time, clear. One word, absolve. You're not sure if it's a command, a request, or a memory. You don't answer. Instead, You walk back toward the main hall of the infirmary. A crow caws from outside the window, jarringly normal. You pause at one of the beds and imagine a monk, thin coughing eyes, sunken, mumbling a final confession to a brother who doesn't know he's already infected. There's a reason ghosts linger here. Not out of horror, but unfinished business. Pain without closure. And somewhere in this very room, that pain is still echoing. You find a journal on a shelf, fragile, water-stained. Inside, entries from what appears to be a medicus monk. Brother Elias passed during lauds. He asked for his sister. I told him she was praying for him. She has been dead these 5 years. You read another. Brother Julian saw a woman in white outside his window. Said she had no face. Fever has made him imaginative. One last entry. I felt someone sit on my bed last night. But I sleep alone now. You close the journal. Your breath is shallow. You step outside again. The sun is higher now, cutting golden lines through the mist. You sit on a stone bench under a weeping willow near the cloister's edge. You let the silence settle. Because the monastery is quieter now, not empty but satisfied, like it's shared something it needed to get off its chest. Still, there's one more whisper. Not from behind you this time, but inside your mind. Stay. It's tempting. But you're not ready to join the silent brotherhood just yet. Not this century. You stand from the bench, slowly brushing old moss from your hands, legs stiff, and mind somewhere between the now and whatever just whispered. Stay into your skull, like it had keys to your memory. You're not staying, at least not willingly. But before you even think of leaving this place, there's still something pulling you. Something you haven't seen. Not up in the belfry, not in the scriptorium, and not even in the ghost-soaked infirmary. No, you still haven't gone below. The tunnels. You first spotted the entrance tucked behind a collapsed arch near the edge of the herb garden, a squat, moss-choked stairwell that descends into the earth like the monastery's own secret apology to the underworld. At the time, you told yourself it was just a storage cellar. Someplace they kept turnips and onions. It's not turnips. It's never turnips. So, here you are, standing at the threshold, sunlight brushing the top step, while the rest disappears into a throat of shadows. You click your flashlight on. It flickers. Of course, you step down. The air thickens with every footfall. It smells of iron-damp earth and the kind of mold that makes your lungs nervous. The temperature drops quickly, like you're walking into a deep cave rather than an architectural feature. The staircase winds gently, then spits you out into a stone corridor. Narrow, just wide enough for one. The ceiling is low enough to force a subtle hunch. You can hear water dripping somewhere far away. And less comforting, you hear nothing else. No birds, no wind, just you and the slow tap of your own heartbeat echoing like footsteps that don't quite match yours. Welcome to the Undercroft. This subterranean level was built not just for storage, but for safety. During raids, or wars, or plagues, monks would retreat here to pray, wait, or hide. Some monasteries even had escape tunnels that ran beneath the countryside and emerged in distant woods or sympathetic villages. You don't know if this one has an exit, but you do know that it's still occupied. Here's your mainstream science fact to keep you grounded. Underground chambers like these have unique acoustic properties. The combination of stone moisture and enclosed air can create standing waves, acoustic illusions where sound seems to stick to certain spots. So, if you hear a voice whispering on repeat, echoing from nowhere, it might be an ancient chant bouncing around a frequency trap. Or it might be worse. You walk deeper. The walls are carved with occasional marks, some decorative, others not. There's a crude fish etched near the entrance, an early Christian symbol, a few Greek letters, and lower by your knee, a line of scratches that seem not accidental. You count them. 22, all evenly spaced. Not decoration, a record. You pass through a narrow arch and into a wider room, barely lit by the dim spill of your flashlight. This is where they kept the food, maybe, or the sacred stuff. Stone shelves line the walls, though most are empty now, except one. A wooden crate remains half-rotted, and atop it sits something strange. A bone, small, human. Not from an arm or a leg, a finger. Still ringed with a bit of gold. A monk's seal ring so worn the symbol is just a ghost. You pick it up. It's light, fragile, and as soon as you do, you hear a cough. Soft, wet, close. You freeze, turn. No one. But the air behind you is colder, denser. You place the finger bone back carefully, politely, apologetically. Another passage leads off the room, narrower still. The ceiling dips so low you have to stoop. Your flashlight flickers again, on, off, on. And just as the beam returns, you see something ahead. A door, not stone, wood, reinforced with blackened iron and wrapped in a chain that's long since rusted through. The door stands slightly ajar. Of course it does. You push it open. The room beyond is circular. Perfectly so. The walls are smooth, too smooth to have been carved by the same hands that built the rest of the monastery. In the center of the room sits a well, round, deep, dry. You peer inside. The walls vanish into blackness, and on the rim of the well, a book, open, untouched by moisture or mold. You lean in. It's handwritten, crisp, ink still dark. The first page reads, "Let it be recorded here in silence that what waits below is not to be spoken of, lest it answer." Cool. You immediately regret being able to read. Here's your fringe fact of the day throughout Europe. Some monastic orders believed the earth itself could be holy or profane. Caves, wells, underground rivers. These were thin spaces, not just in the spiritual sense, but in the metaphysical one. Some monks believed that the deeper you went underground, the closer you came to either divine knowledge or unspeakable presence. Some referred to these spaces as umbrae sanctum, sacred shadows. Others had no names for them at all, just rules. Don't speak in them, don't write in them, and above all, don't look too long. You turn the page, another line. The bell rang once. We answered. The bell rang twice. We prayed. The bell rang thrice. We sealed the passage. Sealed. You shine your light around the room, and there beyond the well, you see it, a flat circle in the wall. Bricked, seamless, but out of place. Newer than the rest. Not fresh, but definitely not as old. This is what they closed off. Whatever's behind that wall was meant to be forgotten. And someone, maybe the same person who left the book, is warning you not to try to remember. You feel it again. That low frequency hum, not sound, vibration. Like something vast is shifting beneath your feet. You back away, slowly. As you turn, the air grows heavier. You feel pressure in your ears, like you're descending fast in an elevator. You walk quickly through the doorway, back into the narrower tunnel. You don't look behind you. You don't need to. Something is watching, and it's not done waiting. You reach the main corridor of the Undercroft and follow the route back toward the stairwell. The air lightens with every step, though your breath remains shallow, and your heart beats like a warning drum. When you finally emerge into daylight, the warmth feels unreal, too soft, too alive. You pause at the garden's edge and look back toward the tunnel entrance. There's a shadow there, just at the bottom step. It doesn't move. You don't wave. You walk back into the cloister and sit beside the dry fountain spoon, still tucked in your pocket, that book's words echoing in your ears. The bell rang thrice, and suddenly you remember something. It has rung 3 times since you arrived. Once when you entered, once during the night, and once this morning. You stare at the bell tower high above, then down at the dry fountain, and then at your hands. They're shaking, ever so slightly. You sit by the dry fountain, hands still trembling, though the sun is shining. You'd think warmth and daylight would bring comfort after hours wandering the monastery's haunted veins, but no. If anything, the light just reveals how much you missed in the dark. 3 bell chimes, 1 hidden passage, and something watching from below. You close your eyes, trying to collect yourself, but instead of peace, your mind conjures faces. Not clear ones. Just glimpses, pale eyes, behind a cowl, hands folded in silence, lips moving in prayers, long detached from living breath. You shake your head and stand. There's one last place to visit before you even consider leaving. Visitors who never left. This monastery hosted travelers, pilgrims, penitents, royal guests, even condemned heretics, waiting on mercy that never arrived. And some of them, well, they didn't check out. You cross the cloister, past the refectory and infirmary, to the western wing, where guest quarters once stood. The structure is less intact here, partially collapsed in one corner. You step carefully through the broken arch and find yourself in a long corridor with evenly spaced doorways on both sides. Each leads into a small room, barely large enough for a cot, a desk, and a crucifix. You enter the first one. Dust coats everything. A rusted bed frame, a broken quill on the floor. On the desk, a wax seal stamped into a faded letter, half burned. You lean closer. The name is illegible, but the handwriting is ornate, aristocratic. The seal a lion rampant circled by Latin. You vaguely recall a noble family connected to the area in the 1500s. Supposedly, one of them sought refuge here after a political scandal, something to do with embezzled church funds and a mistress disguised as a choir boy. He was never seen again. Local legend says he died in this very room. Others say he became a monk out of guilt, joining the silent brotherhood and taking vows to keep his past from following him. But you wonder, what if he stayed not out of choice, but because something wanted him here? You back out and check the next room. This one is tidier. The bed's still intact. The air somehow less stale. On the table sits a small wooden rosary, and behind it, a sketch of a woman, charcoal soft lines unfinished. Someone trying to remember a face, or forget one. This was probably a pilgrim's room. People traveled far for blessings, relics, absolution. Some were ill. Some were dying. Some never made it home. Here's your science fact for the hour bones found beneath medieval pilgrimage sites. Show evidence of chronic illness, tuberculosis, arthritis, syphilis. Some traveled with open sores, hoping to be healed by holy touch. Others just wanted to die near something sacred, and sometimes they did. In one French monastery, archaeologists found the body of a traveler buried beneath a guest room, unmarked, undocumented, not a monk, just someone who arrived, stayed a few nights, and never left. Buried quietly, hidden maybe, or protected. You step into the next room. It's different, fresher. The bed is made, the candle unburnt. The air smells faintly of lavender and beeswax, and on the wall, scratched into the plaster, in a delicate hand you see the word, non abeo. I do not leave. You step back quickly. Your shoulder brushes the door frame, and for a second the air in the hallway changes. It smells wrong. Not just old. Sick. Rotten linen, sour wine, blood. Then it's gone. You keep moving, faster now. Room after room, all different, all similar. Some empty, others feel occupied, not by bodies, but by presence. In one, the bed has been burned, blackened, charred in a perfect rectangle. The walls above it are smeared with soot, and a single word is written there too, this time in ash. Red. Return. You don't linger. You head toward the end of the hallway where the corridor turns. There's a door here heavier than the others, marked with symbols that don't look like Latin or even human, and the lock broken. Recently. You push it open. The room beyond is round. Another circular chamber. Whoever designed this place had a thing for geometry. At the center is a chair, stone, shaped like a throne, but worn smooth, as if someone sat in it far too long, and surrounding it scratches, scorches, wax drippings. Dozens of melted candles now hardened into a wax sea around the base. You walk around it slowly, then see what's carved into the back of the throne. A single sentence. Hic auditur. He is heard here. Not God necessarily, just he. Let's go weird again. There's a little-known theory among early occult scholars that some monasteries housed listening posts, places not where monks prayed to be heard, but where something else listened to them. A force, a presence, a shape of silence that grew stronger the more attention it was given. A few fringe historians argue that some monks went mad, not from solitude or penance, but from being answered, that their prayers became doors. You step back from the throne. The room goes colder. You feel it again, that strange internal pressure, the sense of being watched too closely, like every cell in your body is suddenly under review. You leave the room, back into the hallway. And as you pass the final guest room on the left, the door creaks open just slightly. You stop, peer inside. There's no furniture, just footprints in the dust. Bare feet leading in, saw, then disappearing. Not out. You back away slowly, then turn and head straight for the chapel. Not because it's safe, but because you need to be somewhere the light still touches. Inside, the morning sun is pouring through the few remaining colored panes, painting the stone in amber green and royal blue. You sit in the last pew, the one that's half broken, and let your heart slow. You hear nothing now. No bells, no steps, just your breath, and the echo of 100 visitors who came here hoping for salvation, peace, or even just a bed and a warm meal. Some found it, others didn't. Some stayed. But for now you sit, you breathe, you listen, and for the first time, the monastery listens back in silence. Not the watchful kind, the restful kind, the kind that says, for now, you're allowed to remain among the living. You remain in the chapel longer than you mean to. It feels like a pause, a soft breath in the middle of a sentence no one has finished. Sunlight continues streaming in through the broken stained glass, washing the altar in fractured color. A golden sliver hits the cracked stone, just so, making the dust look like it's dancing. This moment, quiet, warm, still, could lull you into thinking the worst is behind you. It's not, because the music hasn't started yet. And monks, as you're learning, weren't just scribes, gardeners, and alchemists. They were singers. The soul of a monastery lived in its choir loft, and sometimes, according to legend, it still does. You rise bones popping with that satisfying post-sitting crackle, and make your way up a side staircase to the choir loft that overlooks the chapel nave. The stone steps are narrow and uneven, worn into a subtle dip by centuries of careful robed feet. The air grows colder with each step, and as you near the top, your ears begin to ring. You step into the loft, and there it is. A row of wooden choir stalls carved with elaborate designs, angels' vines, even a cat holding a fish. Some are cracked, others untouched by time. In front of the stalls sits a single heavy music stand, tilted as if waiting for a hymn. No sheet music, no candles, just dust and something heavy in the air. Monks used to gather here for hours of chanting, Gregorian mostly. They sang in Latin, often in plain song, their voices merging into one continuous smooth tide. The chant didn't just fill the air, it became the space, a form of breathing, made sacred. Here's your science fact. Gregorian chant, when performed in a space like this, activates the parasympathetic nervous system, literally calming the body. It slows the heart, lowers blood pressure, and can even synchronize brain waves when sung in groups. It's a holy lullaby backed by neurology. You close your eyes and almost hear it, the way voices might have echoed off the stone. The slight delay between phrases, the harmony of breath and prayer. Then you do hear it, very faintly. From somewhere behind the altar beneath the vault of the chapel, a single note. Sustained, low, not from an instrument, from a voice. You freeze. The sound lingers for a second, then cuts off like a thread being snipped. The air shivers with the silence that follows. Scientists still argue whether residual audio hallucinations can occur in places with intense acoustic resonance. Some claim our brains, desperate for expected patterns, fill the silence with remembered sound. Others say these are acoustic ghosts repeating phrases captured by the shape of the architecture itself. You tell yourself it's one of those. You move along the loft, passing each choir stall. You run your fingers across the backs of the benches. The wood is smooth in some places, splintered in others. One bench creaks louder than expected. You look down. Someone's carved a message under the armrest. Too many voices. They follow me home. You blink and look away. Another stall. Another carving. He sings alone. Do not answer him. Lovely. You reach the end of the row and step toward the central overlook where you can see the chapel floor below. It's empty. Still. Then you hear another note. Higher. Clearer. It doesn't echo. You turn slowly, and behind you, in the last choir stall, you see a shadow shift. Not movement, just the impression of one. Like the air took the shape of something that used to sit there. Something that's still waiting for the next verse. Let's dip into the fringe. There's a long-standing belief among some liturgical historians that sacred music, when repeated in the same space across centuries, creates what they call oral hauntings. Not ghosts per se, but memories made of sound. Places where certain harmonics reawaken something in the walls. And some monasteries, they banned specific hymns because they triggered events. Sudden cold spots, unexplainable voices, choir stalls that vibrated without sound. You back away from the overlook and glance down at the floor again. Nothing. Just that dry quiet that clings to old churches like incense residue. You take a deep breath and walk toward the stairwell. But halfway down, you hear a soft sound. Not chanting, not singing, breathing, not yours. It's coming from above. You move a little faster. Your feet barely touch the final steps as you exit into the nave. The moment you cross the chapel threshold back into daylight, the pressure lifts. The silence outside feels natural again. Non-judgmental. You don't look back. Instead, you head toward the courtyard. Your legs take you there like they know where you need to go. You pass under the cloister arches, sun now high enough to throw long shadows across the grass. You sit again on the bench, beside the fountain, and exhale. So, let's take a moment to talk about the idea of haunted music. Some say it's about pattern recognition, your brain expecting harmony and generating it. Others believe it's a response to atmospheric infrasound, low-frequency sound waves below the level of human hearing that can cause anxiety, unease, even hallucinations. But some musicologists, they suggest it's memory, not yours. The buildings, monasteries like this one, aren't just filled with prayers. They're filled with rhythm, ritual, echoes of daily chants repeated over and over for centuries. It's not far-fetched to imagine the space remembering its song, especially when someone like you walks in without singing. You close your eyes. You try humming a single note. It trembles in your throat. You let it fade, and when you open your eyes, nothing has changed. But something feels softer, like you've paid a debt. You rise unsure what time it is anymore. The sun is high, maybe late morning, maybe not real. Honestly, time's been acting suspicious ever since the bells started ringing themselves. You feel drawn to the old refectory again, not for food, but for company. It's emptier in the daylight. The ghosts have better things to do when the sun's out. But as you step over the threshold, Your eyes are drawn to the far end, the prior's table. A cup sits there now. You're sure it wasn't there before. You approach it slowly. It's wooden, simple. Inside, a handful of rosemary leaves float in cold water. Hospitality. A warning. You don't drink it, but you leave a coin beside it, just in case the host is watching. You exit into the open air again and walk back toward the dormitory. You're tired now. Not the kind of tired that sleep solves, but the kind that makes you want to lie down, just to listen to silence for a while. You reach the steps and glance toward the chapel tower. Just once. No movement. Good. You step into the dormitory, and for the first time since you arrived, you're not afraid of what you might dream. You don't sleep. Not exactly. You lie on the stone slab in the dormitory. Eyes closed. Body still. Mind drifting somewhere between rest and reverence. The monastery has quieted again. No more whispers. No sudden footsteps, just the low, steady hush of an old building that's finally content with your presence, or tired of playing. You breathe in the heavy air smelling of limestone, stale wax, and something almost like sage. Someone once said monks slept in shifts because no soul should be left unguarded in the dark. You understand now. The night isn't just dangerous because of what's out there. It's dangerous because of what stirs when nothing else is. But you're safe for the moment. You sit up slowly, stretch. Your back protests with the subtle crunch of someone who's spent a little too much time playing archaeologist without stretching first. You rub your eyes and step outside into the corridor. It's early afternoon now, judging by the golden slant of light coming through the high cloister windows. The day feels warmer, almost hospitable, and you know exactly where you're going next. The infirmary showed you pain. The scriptorium showed you madness. The bell tower showed you persistence. But now, you're walking toward the place where the echoes of both mind and body rest. The burial crypt. The hallway to it is simple. No ornate carvings, no colored glass, just flat stone, quiet steps. The only decoration is a small carved lamb above the archway at the end. You duck through the door, and immediately the air changes. Colder, drier, less alive. The stairs descend slowly, a gentle slope that lets your breath stay steady. You don't need a flashlight. Sunlight filters faintly through an oculus above the entrance, but you turn it on anyway. You reach the crypt. It's not vast, a single chamber, maybe 20 paces across, lined with alcoves, each holding a stone slab marked with a name. Most are Latin. Some are barely legible, the carvings worn soft by moisture and time. You kneel by one at random. Frater Ambrosius, 1321, 1383. There's a peace here. You feel it in your chest. Not dread, not even sorrow, just stillness. A silence that feels earned. Here's your science anchor. Buried bodies in crypts like these often preserved longer than expected, due to the cool, dry air and the stone insulation. Archaeologists have found mummified remains beneath abbeys where the skin and hair were still intact centuries later. A little creepy, sure, but it's not supernatural, just chemistry, airflow, and the miracle of limestone. You walk slowly past each alcove. Some monks were buried with objects: a wooden cross, a faded cloth one, even with a tiny book clutched to his chest. You stop at one stone that reads only "Unknown Brother," no dates, no name, just a marker. And there etched faintly above it something in Latin: Qui venit remanet, he who came remains. You sit down on the floor, cross-legged like a novice waiting for instruction. There's something calming about this space. Final, clean. The monastery above may echo with unfinished business, but down here, things are settled. Lives lived and closed. Books with endings. Unless there's a door at the back, smaller, half-sized, recessed into the wall like a secret the crypt itself got tired of hiding. You rise and cross to it, fingertips brushing the iron handle. Cold. Your flashlight beam barely penetrates the darkness beyond, but you step through anyway. It opens into a narrow corridor, barely wide enough to move through. The walls are unadorned, damp. You follow it down a short flight of stairs, and then you enter another room. This one's different. No burial slabs, no names, just stone benches along the wall and a pit in the center of the floor, circular 6 feet wide, filled with darkness. You've seen too many of these. Another well, or something else. There's something scratched around the edge of the pit, not carved, scratched, frantically, dozens of lines. Words layered on top of one another, some legible, most not. But one phrase repeats, over and over. He calls from below. Let's talk fringe theory again. In some regions, monks believed in echoes of sin, that certain acts, especially if done in secret, could stain a place. Not metaphorically, physically. That the guilt remained waiting to be acknowledged. They called it silentum malum, the silent wrong. And if those acts were buried literally, they sometimes grew roots. There are stories of monasteries that sealed off entire rooms after certain confessions, not because of plague, not because of crime, but because what was said in them never left. Scientists still argue whether spaces like these just fuel human imagination, or whether psychological imprinting could create a kind of energetic residue strong enough to disturb others who enter. Either way, you're not sticking around to test it. You back out of the room, past the scratched floor, back into the crypt. And that's when you hear it. Music, faint, from above, a chant, slow, smooth, words you can't quite catch. You stand still. It stops. You climb the stairs quickly and emerge back into the hallway. No one's there. But the air still rings faintly with harmony. You exit into the cloister, and that's when you notice the shadows. They're longer now, too long. The sun hasn't moved that much, and yet the courtyard looks darker. The arches deeper, the windows sharper. The monastery's mood has shifted again. You feel it. Not anger, not hostility. Something approaching. You head for the main hallway, the one that leads to the outer entrance. The big wooden doors you entered through so long ago. They're closed now, not locked, but closed. You approach slowly, then reach for the handle. It turns, but the door won't open. Not because it's sealed, because something's standing on the other side. You hear footsteps, your footsteps, coming from outside. You let go of the handle and back away, step by step, and as you retreat, a voice rises. Not a whisper, not inside your head, a chant, male, dozens of voices, singing in unison, coming from the chapel. You turn. The cloister is empty. The shadows deepen, and the bells begin to ring. Once, twice, a third time, then a fourth. The first time, they've rung 4. You run. Back through the cloister, into the dormitory, you dive onto the stone bed chest heaving. You don't know what the 4th chime means, but you know it wasn't you who answered this time, and something else has just begun walking the halls. You don't move. You lie frozen on the slab in the dormitory, staring up at the rafters, listening to the 4th chime echo away, like a ripple vanishing into still water. 1 chime was your arrival. 2, the monastery acknowledging you. 3, something awakening. But 4, you're not sure. But your bones are. They're heavy now, rooted, like the monastery has laid a hand on your chest, not to harm you, but to remind you that leaving is no longer a simple matter of walking out the door. You sit up slowly. The air has changed again. It's colder, but not the chill of open windows or deep stone. This cold feels intentional, like something is brushing past you, just out of sight, its robes barely grazing the edge of your reality. The dormitory is still, too still. You step lightly to the door, glance into the corridor. Nothing moves. But every corner looks too dark, every doorway just a little too wide. You head for the chapel, because if anything is going to explain the sudden change in atmosphere, it's going to happen there. You walk briskly through the cloister. The light has flattened gray and pale, as though time paused halfway through the day and forgot to press play. The air smells of old wax and something sharper, ozone dust disturbed after too long lying quiet. As you approach the chapel, you begin to hear the chant again. But it's not music this time. It's rhythm. No melody, just syllables. Syncopated. A beat with breath. You step through the arched doorway into the nave. The pews are empty, but the sound is coming from the choir loft. Again, low, steady. Voices in unison, but speaking, not singing. You can't make out the words. And that's the worst part, because it means they weren't meant for you. You glance up toward the loft. Nothing. But you can feel the weight of the sound pressing against the ceiling like it's trying to fall down onto the floor. You move to the front of the chapel toward the altar. That's when you notice it. The candle. Lit. It wasn't lit before. You're certain. The wax is fresh, the flame steady, and beside it, a book. Not the Bible, not a psalter, something else. You lean closer. The writing is neat, newer than anything else in the monastery. It reads, "The procession begins when the 4th bell tolls." Your breath stills. You turn. The chapel is empty, but the floor is no longer dry. Across the center of the aisle, faint, wet footprints trail from the entrance to the altar. barefoot, adult, deep. They stop where you're standing. You don't look behind you. You can't. Not yet. Let's talk history for a moment, because after all, this is boring history for sleep. And nothing screams boring like monks walking around in the dark while you hyperventilate. Monasteries had processions for everything. Feast days, fast days, burials, holy relic transfers, seasonal blessings, anniversaries of ancient miracles. The route was fixed chapel, cloister, refectory, then back to the chapel. All in silence, a ritual loop. But there's one kind of procession nobody liked to talk about: the penitent procession. Only used in extreme cases, usually at night. Always barefoot, always hooded, always silent. And only for those who had confessed something too terrible to forget. They walked in a circle, repeating prayers not for salvation, but for containment, to keep something from waking. Some say it worked, some say it didn't. You step back from the altar. The candle flickers not from air, but from presence. The chant above grows louder. Still not words, still not yours. You head for the sacristy, the small room off to the side, where vestments, chalices, and sacred texts were once stored. It's mostly empty now, except for one thing: a robe, black, folded neatly, set on a bench, and next to it, sandals. You stare at them. They're your size. You don't touch them. You leave. Outside the chapel, the air thickens. Not like fog, like expectation. You hear it now. Footsteps, soft, rhythmic, coming from the cloister. You walk toward the sound, not away, because running seems like a very bad idea. You round the corner and freeze. They're here, a line of cowled figures, hooded, silent, walking barefoot in single file along the cloister walk. There must be a dozen of them, maybe more. They don't look at you, they don't see you, but they're real. Their feet touch the stone. You hear it. Slap, slap, slap. Soft, slow, endless. They follow the procession path, past the dormitory, the refectory, the chapel, around and around. You press yourself into an archway. They pass inches from you. No wind, no temperature change, but you feel it. That hum in your chest, the low-frequency dread of being seen by something that has no interest in you yet but might. One stops, mid-step. You don't breathe. The figure turns its head, not toward you, but toward the sky. Then continues walking. You watch them vanish around the far side of the cloister. You wait, a full minute. 2. Then you hear them again, coming back around. It's a loop, endless, purposeful. And if this is the penitent procession, that means they're not here for prayer. They're here to hold something in. You remember the book by the altar. The procession begins when the 4th bell tolls. You need to leave. You try the front gate again, the one that refused to open last time. You sprint across the courtyard, ducking between arches, dodging memories and murmurs. The gate looms ahead, still closed. You grab the handle. It turns. The door opens, just a crack. Outside, the woods are quiet. The path you took here still winds down the hill. You can leave, right now. But you turn back, because they're walking again. And this time, they're not alone. At the back of the procession, a taller figure follows. Not hooded, bareheaded, hair like smoke, eyes like absence. No feet. Just the sound. Slap, slap. The echo of feet that don't exist. It looks at you, and you finally understand. You were never here by accident. You were called. But you stepped through the door anyway, into sunlight, and the gate creaks shut behind you. Not slammed, just closed, softly, as if something inside the monastery is waiting for you to come back, tonight, or someday. When the bell rings 5, you walk slowly down the hill. The forest is quiet, unnaturally so. No birds, no wind. Even your footsteps sound muffled, like the air is trying to forget you passed through. The path is the same one you followed up when this all started, though it feels longer now. Heavier. You don't look back. Not yet. But you feel it. The monastery's presence. Still there. Watching. Not with hostility, but with memory. Like an old friend you haven't quite forgiven, but still visit every year out of habit. Your feet crunch over leaves and gravel your body, stiff from too much time spent sleeping on stone and dodging ancient processions. The trees part in front of you, opening into a clearing where the woods begin to thin. You pause, hand on the bark of a twisted oak, and glance back at the hill. The monastery's roofline peaks above the treetops, just a silhouette against the sky. Still. Silent. Waiting. It will wait as long as it has to, because that's what it does. You reach your car, or what's left of the path anyway. It's there, just where you left it. A little dustier, maybe. Maybe the tires are a bit flatter. Or maybe you're just noticing details that don't matter anymore. You open the door, slide into the seat, and close it with a soft click. And for the first time in, how long has it been? You exhale. Here's one last fact to take with you. Monasteries were never meant to be places. Not really. They were meant to be systems, patterns, rhythms of repetition. Pray, chant, work, sleep, repeat. The physical space. Just a container. What haunts a monastery isn't its ghosts, it's its memory of purpose. And when that purpose breaks, something else moves in. Something that remembers the bells, the loops, the silent feet. You drive down the hill without looking back again. But the sound of a slow, single footstep on cold stone stays in your mind the entire ride. The car hums gently as you continue down the winding road, and slowly, gradually, the weight starts to lift from your chest. The trees thin. The light grows warmer. The road ahead unspools like a ribbon, guiding you away from all that heavy stone and echoing silence. You roll the window down a little. Fresh air brushes your cheek, cool but not cold. Real. The scent of pine and dirt replaces that ever-present trace of incense and old wax. Your heartbeat settles into something that doesn't feel like a countdown, and you begin to feel it, now that the slow, pleasant pull of sleep edging into your thoughts. Your eyelids grow heavy. The rhythm of the drive, the hum of the engine, the warmth of the seat, it's all conspiring to help you rest. You did it. You made it through. Through the winding halls and haunted footsteps, through whispered names and watching bells. You were the guest who stayed just long enough, but not too long. The monastery didn't keep you. It just noticed you. And now you're back. The pillow beneath your head is soft. The world outside your window is quiet. The only footsteps you'll hear now are your own turning gently in dreams. So, go ahead. Let your breath slow. Let your muscles soften. Let the flickering images of ancient corridors fade into nothing more than gentle shadows in your memory. You are safe. You are home. And whatever walked those halls, it's still walking. But it's far, far away now, far behind you. Let it echo. You, on the other hand, can finally rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.